Hey guys, welcome back to Movies and TVs on the Ball, talking about pilot season. Come fly with me. This is a topic where I'm going to be looking at the first episode of Breaking Bad. I have said about last week that I am going to be talking about both Breaking Bad and The Sopranos. I know that Avatar was something I was going to talk about, but that'll be on a separate video. This video is going to be, so there's going to be three videos. The first one is going to be on the Breaking Bad pilot. The second one's going to be on the Sopranos pilot. And the third one will be on Avatar The Last Airbender, just to cover those three. I have seen most of Breaking Bad. I've seen the first three episodes of The Sopranos. And I have seen maybe 5 minutes of Avatar The Last Airbender. So this is just going to be our this is gonna be part of TV time, I guess. Um, so I guess Breaking Bad. I discovered Breaking Bad through the YouTube channel Screen Junkies Honest Trailers. They were the ones that really got me interested in the Breaking Bad. We started watching it on Netflix, and I went through the whole series. At this point, I don't remember all the whole series, but I do remember the pilot episode and the final episode. So, so when I was thinking about doing this podcast, I was looking at sort of, and if you saw my previous preview video on The Sopranos and Breaking Bad, this video is going to be more focused on, I guess you could say it's the anti-hero, because the story will go from anti-hero story will look at kind of both these two anti-heroes. You've got Walter White, who kind of starts out as mild-manner science teacher turned drug lord kingpin, or as I like to call him, if what if there was a lot of I remember there was a fan art done on Breaking Bad, a Simpsons parody of it, and it shows a image of Ned Flanders in his green T-shirt or green shirt with a gun, and basically showing the Breaking Bad poster from the first season as Ned Flanders, and Bart Simpson as Jesse Pinkman. And I was kind of and I just kind of remember that. And I do remember going back to the Honest trailer, I remember them saying, it's so good that it's kind of like drugs or something. And so I was kind of wanting to do just a video or a podcast on Breaking Bad, just to kind of keep keep it interesting. Um, let's kind of get the meat and potatoes of it. You had Breaking Bad was released in um, aired January 20th of 2008 and ended September 29th of 2013. So it lasted for 5 seasons. And this was a time when cable television series started to the bar push the barrier with sort of the anti-hero segment. This was, Tony Soprano The Sopranos ended a year earlier in 2007, and this was sort of the um, really the first show for basically cable television to be this extreme. So I guess what I'm going to say is this, and this was sort of right after um, for Bryan Cranston. This show started right after Malcolm in the Middle. So the show pretty much centers, or I guess before I start about that, let's get into the meat and potatoes. The creator of the show was Vince Gilligan. Vince Gilligan is best known for he wrote Breaking Bad. He's written. He was a co-executive producer for the X Files. His other works include he was a writer for Battle Creek. He was a creator of that. He was creator of. He was creator of The Lone Gunman, which was a spin-off of the X Files. He wrote and created the X Files um, with David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson as Fox Mulder and Dana Scully. I haven't seen any of the X Files, but I've heard it's been pretty good. He wrote the Cancel Too Soon series that was a spin-off of the X Files called The Lone Gunman, and he's had some work in films, including he wrote Hancock in 2008 with Will Smith. He's written Home Fries with Drew Barrymore and Luke Wilson. He's he did the spin-off series Better Call Saul from 2015 to 2022, and he's worked on but he hasn't done that much. He hasn't done that much film work. Um, he's. I think he's a. So that's pretty much Vince Gilligan. He wrote the pilot episode, which we will cover. Um, it was. It starred. You had Bryan Cranston, who, if you've watched our Power Rangers, the movie, Savant's Power Rangers, the movie podcast, you will know that he was, for one of his first roles, he was a monster in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, and he also plays Zordon in Power Rangers. Mighty Morphin. He was a monster on an episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the show, and he was Zordon in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. He was also in. He was played Hal in Malcolm in the Middle for 7 seasons. Um, he was Jack O'Donnell in Argo with Ben Affleck. Um, he was in before Breaking Bad. I think he had his start in some um, commercials. But you've probably seen him in episodes of How I Met Your Mother. He was in the Godzilla movie from 2014 movie, the remake of Total Recall. John Carter, he voiced Jim Gordon, Batman Year One. He was in The Lincoln Lawyer, and he was in an episode of American Dad. He hasn't really had, or he was also in Honey I Shrunk the Kids, the TV series, Chicago Hope, VIP, Saving Private Ryan, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, That Thing You Do, um, and episodes of LA Law, episodes of The Flash from the 1990s. He was in episodes of Baywatch, and he's done a lot of roles in. But this one was really his sort of breakout role as Walter White. Um, and I'll get into the character as we go through the pilot, but I'll give you a little bit. Walter White is sort of if Ned Flanders becomes a drug dealer. That's pretty much what he is. Then you had Aaron Paul, who played Jesse Pinkman. Aaron Paul is best known for his roles as Jesse Pinkman. He's done work in episodes of The X Files in 2001, walk on roles in NYPD Blue in 2002, CSI in 2002. His first film was Van Wilder with Ryan Reynolds in 2002. Um, he was in Birds of Prey. He played which was a canceled too soon television series based on the Batman and Catwoman's daughter. That was his first like role, kind of big role as Jerry. He was in episodes of ER, episodes of Bones. His movie roles include The Last House on the Left. He was in the animated series Tron Uprising. Um, he's done he showed up in an episode of Simpsons as Jesse Pinkman. He was in the movie Need for Speed in 2014. He was in movies such as Central Intelligence with The Rock and Kevin Hart. He also was in the Breaking Bad movie El Camino. Since Breaking Bad ended, he was in BoJack Horseman, episodes of Westworld, um, episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and his last role was in the coldest case. The Past Has a Long Memory, which is a podcast series like what I'm doing. Then you had Anna Gunn, who played Skylar White, Walter White's wife. Anna Gunn, um, her role, she started acting probably in 1992. She was in Quantum Leap. She did an episode of Seinfeld. Her movie roles include and episodes of NYPD Blue. Her movie roles include Junior with Arnold Schwarzenegger, um, Murder One, episodes of Chicago Hope. She was in Enemy of the State with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. She was in The Guardian, episodes of The Practice, episodes of Yes Dear, the episodes of Dragnet. Um, her movie after she was in an episode of Lie to Me. So there's another character that another actress that showed up on Lie to Me, but that was in 2010. Um, she was in, so that was during the time she did Breaking Bad. Since Breaking Bad ended, she was in Portlandia, episodes of Criminal Minds. She did voice work as Skylar White for Robot Chicken. She did episodes of Shades of Blue, um, The Most Dangerous Game, and the TV series Sugar with Colin Farrell for Apple TV Plus. So that's kind of great that she's in there. Then you had uh, Betty Betsy Brandt. Betsy Brandt is best known for her role as she plays Marie Schneider, who is um, um, Skylar White's sister, and she is pretty much when you kind of see her in the first episode as kind of the gossipy, almost the gossipy sister. Um, and she's played by Betsy Brandon. Betsy Brandon is best known for her roles in. She was in Magic Mike. She played a banker in 2012. So that's you probably be like, hey, it's her from that movie. She was in before Breaking Bad. She was in episodes of ER, episodes of Judging Amy, episodes of Jag, episodes of Without a Trace, episodes of NCIS, CSI, Boston Legal, Private Practice, Fairly Legal. This was she kind of had some walk on roles in this time period. She was in Body of Proof, but Magic Mike was her big movie role, and she was in episodes of Children's Hospital, and recently she was in A Million Little Things in 2020. Um, she showed back up in the spin-off series Better Call Saul, and she was also in Saint X in 2023 and The Bad Orphan in 20 at this year in 2024. So she plays Marie Schneider, who is Hank Schneider's wife, and Hank Schneider is played by Dean Norris. Now Dean Norris, he's pretty much kind of before he got into I guess Breaking Bad was his first sort of from what I've noticed is his first but he's also been hey it's that guy type roles. His roles include uh, he started out with in roles such as The Equalizer, Police Academy 6, Cop at Gym, episodes of Beauty and the Beast and from 1987 to 1990. He played Tim Kavanaugh in Lethal Weapon 2. Um, he was in Total Recall. He played Tony. He played a SWAT team leader in the 1990s film Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And he was also a SWAT team leader in the great Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Dun 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 dun. He was in the Lawnmower Man with Pierce Brosnan. He was in The Firm, and let's see what else. In the 90s, he was also in Murder One, On the Line TV movie. He was the commanding officer in Starship Troopers. That's where I saw him from. He was in The Negotiator, episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger, Nash Bridges, episodes of Charmed. He was in The Cell. He was in The One with Jet Li. Episodes of Boston Legal, The West Wing, Nip Tuck. He was Officer Collins in Evan Almighty. Um, he was in The Cleaner, True Blood, episodes of Lie to Me, and he was in the movie Prom. He showed up in Law and Order LA, and he's recently been in um, Law and Order Organized Crime with Elliot Stabler. With Elliot Stabler, he played Randall Stabler, his I guess Elliot Stabler's brother. And he was in the TV show Ghost as well. So he plays Frank or Hank Schneider, and Hank Schneider is He's a DEA agent who pretty much throughout the series suspects that his brother-in-law he kind of suspects near the end of the series that his brother-in-law is a drug lord kingpin, but at least throughout the first season he has no idea that his brother-in-law is operating a meth empire. But and he's terrible at telling jokes, and um, he's kind of uh, he's kind of seems like he's a really nice guy. Then you had, I guess we can go with, I think we'll go with R.J. Mitty, who plays Walter White Jr. or Walt Jr. as he's known in the show. He's had a pretty much um, uh, he's had some pretty much bit roles in parts. He was a school jock in episodes of Hannah Montana. He was in an episode of Vegas, the TV series Vegas. He was in the TV movie or short called Weird Science 2 Strange Chemistry, where he played Nerd. Um, I guess Breaking Bad has given him some pretty decent roles. He was in Switched at episodes of Switched at Birth, The Recall, um, Standing Up for Sunny, and The Guardian of Justice Will Save You, a TV series. He was in 7 episodes of that, and he's recently in the Bev. He's been in a couple podcast series as well. But he plays R.J. Mitty, and R.J. Mitty plays Walter White Jr. And Walter White Jr. is he's got cerebral palsy. I think R.J. Mitty he actually has cerebral palsy, the same condition his character in Breaking Bad has. However, his real life conditions is much more milder. He has to learn to walk with crutches and slow down his speech for his role. So he so I think that's sort of interesting that they kind of got somebody that actually kind of knows what he has, and from a person who has hemiplegia, which is a part of cerebral palsy, except it only affects one side of the body. I can relate to that a little bit. But then you had, I guess, and then the rest of the cast is Steve Gomez, played by Steve Michael Quazinda. He was in Beer Fest, episodes of Magnum PI. He was in the Hallmark movie Holiday for Heroes. He was in The Condemned 2, before Breaking Bad. He was In Plain Sight and Three Wise Guys as well. And he plays Gomez um, Garnicia, who is Hank's sort of um, police officer partner. And then you've got Jonathan Banks. Then these guys don't appear in the pilot episode, but they'll appear in the series, and I'll get to them. I'll get to them when they get there. But you've got Jonathan Banks, who plays Mike Imishart. Jonathan Banks is best known for he's a pretty much a just an actor who just shows up in anything. He was in his early works include episodes of ER, episodes of Dexter, CSI Miami, CSI, Ghost Whisperers, episodes of Alias, episodes of Proximity. He was in Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, um, which is one of my guilty pleasure films. Uh, he was in the remake of Harvey, the TV movie starring Harry Anderson and Leslie Nielsen. He was in the 1996 movie Flipper with Elijah Wood. Tales from the Crypt, Walker Texas Ranger, and episodes of Matlock. But he's been kind of in everything. He's been in Identity Theft with um, Jason Bateman and Melissa McCarthy. He was in since Breaking Bad ended. He's been also voice work of Commissioner Gordon and the Batman Arkham Knights, and he's been in episodes of Robot Chicken. He showed up in Incredibles 2 as Rick Decker in 2018, and he was in El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie, and episodes of Better Call Saul. So he's been still part of the Breaking Bad franchise, which is kind of it's become. Then you have, last but not least, you have Bob Odenkirk, who doesn't really show up in the pilot, but I gotta give him a shout out because he starred in this and Better Call Saul because he played Saul Goodman, who is a lawyer for he is a lawyer for Walter White, and his other works include he was a writer for SNL. He was a writer for SNL. He wrote the Chris Farley sketch Man Down by the River. He's also, as an actor, was in Halloween Kills. He was in Nobody. He was in episodes of The Simpsons. He was in Incredibles 2. He played Winston Devner in Incredibles 2. He was in episodes of Drunk History. Um, he was in The Disaster Artist. He was in episodes of Third Rock from the Sun, and I think his first role, episodes of Seinfeld. He's done work in a lot of comedies, such as The Cable Guy. Uh, he played Concert Nerd in Wayne's World 2, and he wrote for Saturday Night Live from 1988 to 1991. So that is Bob Odenkirk, who plays um, Saul Goodman, their lawyer. And that pretty much, I guess, lists the names of the pilots. I think the only one in the pilot, I guess, to add is Crazy Eight, played by Max Argentina, and he was in episodes of Bosch. He was in episodes of Better Call Saul. He was in NCIS New Orleans, episodes of Grimm, Castle, and episodes of Lie to Me as well, and ER. And the other one was Crazy Eight, played by Max Archinga, who was in the, other than Breaking Bad, he was in Grimm, Castle, Blue Bloods, Lie to Me, uh, Private Practice, Surface, Barbershop 2, the new cut, Back in Business, Back in Business, Barbershop 2, Back in Business. I think it was his first role. And he plays Crazy Eight, a drug dealer. So that's the cast of Breaking Bad. Let's finally get into the episode. Do do do. So we open up the episode with Pants slowly, pair of pants slowly falling down from the ground, and an RV starts driving. Um, the RV starts driving down a dirt road. As it's driving, we see a man in his underwear wearing a gas mask with another man passed out in this passenger seat, um in the back of the Winnebago. A We see two men knocked out moving around while the RV is going down the old dirt road. And then and we see the man that's um driving the van is wearing a gas mask. He crashes the Winnebago into a Winnebago. He crashes the Winnebago in um, the mountain, and gets out and starts coughing. Takes off his gas mask. He hears sirens. When he opens the door, there's a bunch of sludge and chemicals that spill out. He he quickly gets his shirt on and gets a camcorder to make his confession. Um, and his confession is a confession to law enforcement, not to law enforcement, but by his family. And he says, Skylar, you're the love of my life, and I love you very enough. And then he mentions his son, Walter Jr. He says, Walter Jr., you're my big man. Um, you're my big man. Um, and he says goodbye. And then he hears the sirens coming, and takes. We see a shot of him from the back as he's walking up the hill to the dirt road where we hear three sirens flying by, and he gets out, points his gun to the screen, and he's pointing at its as he's pointing the gun to the screen. He says, "Let's," in a term, "Let's get it on," and then the credits, Breaking Bad, show up. Then where we move in to, I think it's about we go back. So we go back to 3 weeks later, 3 weeks earlier, and Walter is lying in bed, and he's just thinking in bed. And there are baby gifts and like a crib being made, and Walter gets up in the middle of the night or in the mid morning and gets on his stairmaster and just goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Walt then that later that morning, Walt uh, goes downstairs to his birthday, and goes downstairs to breakfast on his birthday, and we find and he's got his breakfast and he's eating, and um, his son Walter Jr. says, "How does it feel to be old?" And Walt says, how does it feel to be a smartass? And he says, pretty good. Skylar tells Walter Jr., you know, you were late again. And Walter Jr. says, there was no hot water. They look at the plate, and Walt Jr. smells it and says, what is this stuff? And Walter White says, it's veggie bacon. We're watching our cholesterol. And Walter White Jr. is saying, no, not me. I'm not eating this stuff. And Skylar says, eat it. And Walter's like, we're eating it to watch our cholesterol. And then Walter Jr. Makes a comment about how does Walt how does Walt feel about being old, and Walt Sr. says, how does it feel to be a smartass? And he says, pretty good. And then he says, eat your veggie bacon. Then they go to school, and we see Walt's sort of classroom. And like a lot of high school shows, the classroom, there's always one subject that the show is always going to be focused on. And in this one, we find out Walter White is a chemistry teacher. And I like this scene because he's kind of asking the question is, what is chemistry? And he's kind of asking the class, and none of the class is interested in what he has to say, or they're kind of, um, they're sort of, looking out in space. And he says chemistry, and one of the kids raises his hand and says chemistry is about chemicals. And Walt says, no, chemistry is about change. And so he takes a Bunsen burner and he lights the fire, and he says, electrons battling out with protons. And he's got these three squirt bottles that are different colors. And so he um change and he talks about how they bond and change. And he uh uses like one squirt bottle is green, and one squirt bottle is blue, and he sprays the green one and the flames turn into green flames. And then he sprays the blue one, and um the Bunsen burner changes colors to blue flames. And he talks about change, and he's like, that's all of life. And you can see in his eyes how excited he's talking about it, and he's trying to get the class involved. And then he hears some giggling in the back of the room, and he calls these two um, students out, who are a couple. There's, I think his name is Chad. Um, Chad to move. And he's like, Chad, is there something wrong with your table? And then Chad takes his table, and he screeches it across the room, and kind of in defiance. And he says, and he kind of looks at him like, okay, now what? Chad does to Mr. White. And he says, read chapter 6 on electric violence. And it's kind of that scene where he might as well have said, class dismissed. And then we can kind of tell that Walter White isn't, I think he's pretty much known um at the high school, but he's not a social teacher, because he usually eats his lunch. We see him eat his lunch in the in his classroom alone, and that kind of indicates that this guy doesn't doesn't really socialize with the other faculty members. I think he does later on in the show, but um, in some scenes. But as of this, he he we don't really know. He doesn't really socialize with other teachers. So in the afternoon, that afternoon, Walter's working his second job at the car wash, and he's cleaning tires. And throughout this, we hear him cough a couple times to indicate that he's getting sick. And as he's wiping the washing the cars, he starts washing Chad's car. And as he's washing Chad's car, he's washing a car. It's Chad's car because the his student Chad and his girlfriend walk out and go, "Mr. White, let's see those tires shine." And he takes out his phone, actually his camera. I don't know if it's camera phone or if his phone, and takes a picture of him. And it's so embarrassing for Walter, for the teacher to see, our student to see. Well, it's not embarrassing as a student, but as a teacher to see a student clean his car. Um, and and then and the reason why Walter is washing his car is his boss, Mr. Bogdan. I think it's Bogdan. It tells him that one of his employees didn't come in, and he and Bogdan's gonna run register. And Walter says, "Wait a minute, we talked about this." Which I guess they probably previously in the pilot is, he probably has just been told, he's just kind of, his job description is just the cashier register, and that's the reason why he's washing the cars for his students. So that's kind of the reason. And I like that scene because that and him getting, Chad is played by students basically ridiculing Evan Bradrock, who was in In Plain Sight. He says, let's get this tire, let's let these Chad's girlfriend is played by Roberta Marquez Select, who was in Terminator Salvations, 21 Guns, and recently was in News of the World, and also Longmire. Let these tires. But she's pretty much worked in the art department. He's being walked on by both his teacher, or as a teacher to students, and his boss. Let's see. So then that day after work, he goes he goes to his he drives back home. And as he's driving back home, he's driving, and he has the uh, uh, handicap thing on his car, and he on his rear. He takes it off, puts it in the glove compartment, and starts slamming it. He slams it once, it reopens. He slams it again, it reopens, and he gets mad. And he slams it hard, slams it hard. Then he pulls into his driveway, and he gets out of his car and walks in. And then as he opens the door, everyone yells out, "Surprise!" And and all his friends are around, and his wife Skylar comes by and a hands him a beer and whispers in his ear, kisses him, and whispers in the ear that you are so very late. And then we kind of see, um, let's see, sort of the dynamic between how like when you go to a party, the women usually talk with the women and the men usually talk with the men. This is that scene where I guess we start with Skylar and Marie as they are in the kitchen, and one of her friends says, "Skylar, you're looking as flat as a washboard." And you know, and they're not showing, and she kind of, her friend says, "Don't you think so, Marie?" And Marie says she's showing just a little, which I don't know if there is a tendency of jealousy because of her being Skylar's sister. And she's pregnant, where then and then we kind of go to see Hank, and Hank is showing off his his gun. Hank is showing off his gun. It's and saying it's a 44. This is what a 44 Magnum or some sort of, I can't remember the gun, but he's like, this is the gun that I usually carry around. This is the one that I use for mainly protection. And he hands it to Walter Jr. Walter Jr. looks at it and says, "Oh, this gun is like really cool." And then he hands it off to his father, Walter White, and he says, "Hey, Dad, check this gun out. What do come on, come on, take it." And Walt's like, um, you know, says, "Okay," and he grabs it and he kind of feels around and says, "Gosh, it's a lot heavier than I thought it was." And then we kind of see why Walter kind of gets walked on is he says, "Come on," or from his brother-in-law Hank says, "Oh, come on, Walt, you need some excitement in your life." And then he takes a swig of his beer, looks at his watch, and says, "Turn on the Channel 5 news." So he turns on the Channel 5 news, and on the Channel 5 news, um, there's he's being interviewed by the news about uh, viewed by the news about his latest big drug bust of methamphetamine. Hank talks about how it's an ongoing operation, and we see a bunch of cash on the TV screen. And Walt kind of asks, "Hank, how much money is there? Is that?" And he said the DEA confiscated. And Hank says it's about 700 grand. Um, and Walt thinks, "Isn't that unusual?" And he says, "No, we usually get, we get up to 1 million." And then uh, Hank suggests to Walt that maybe I should to on a ride along one day to maybe get some excitement in your life. And Walt says, maybe one day." That's foreshadowing. And uh, and then Walt says someday. And then after the party, Walt and Skylar go to bed. Skylar's on her computer doing a eBay auction, and he asks her what they have plans for Saturday, which I guess the party was Friday night. And he says, Bogdan's got me working Saturday from till about noon. And then he says something to the point of, I'm going, um, there's uh, there's an exhibit at the museum about the Land Rover on Mars that they've got new pictures for. And Walter says, um, and Walter's got a picture, new pictures for, and Walter and Skylar's like, but I thought you were going to paint the house tonight. And Skylar says, and then Skylar says, well, okay, but if you go to this thing, she kind of basically guilt trips him because she says, well, if you go to this, if you want to go to the museum, then I'll paint. But then I'm worried about the baby. And Walt says, you know what? Fine, I'll paint. I'll paint. And she's like, well, thank you. And then, um, so then we see, uh, I guess we don't see, but Walt is lying in bed with Skylar, and Skylar is trying to get him excited for his birthday. Basically, they're going to make out, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I can't, what about the baby?" And they say, "Well, what about the baby? I'm just focusing on you tonight." And she ends up kind of doing this whole like, do it. They start, you know, she, she's trying to get him for a little bit of afternoon delight, and then she ends up winning the auction on eBay. Then the next morning or next day, that Saturday, Walt is working on the car wash, and Walt is uh, wiping down tires and cleaning cars, and he starts coughing, and he starts coughing a lot, and he coughs, coughs, coughs. He stands up, and then he passes out. And what I like about it is, I think there's a scene where he's washing the car and he's coughing, and then he passes out, and he passes out, and nobody actually comes to his defense at all. And then the ambulance comes and picks him up, and he's kind of, he's in the back of the van, and they're driving to the hospital, and he's like, he says, this is so embarrassing. I think it's just because I haven't had eaten a great breakfast, and I just don't have that great of insurance. And the EMT that's listening to Walter's lungs says, "Mr. White, are you a smoker?" And he says, "No, never. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Why don't you just drop me off somewhere?" And he says, "No can do. We're going to the hospital." So he goes to the hospital, and he goes in and takes an MRI and a couple of tests. And as he's taking some tests, Walter is um, taking some tests. Walter is in an MRI, and he sits there. The MRI happens, and then the next scene is he's sitting in a chair talking to a doctor, and it's completely silent. The doctor is speaking to him, and but we don't really hear. We hear maybe a little bit of whispers of what the doctor is saying. And he says, "Walt, did you hear what I had to say?" And Walt says, "Yes, it's lung cancer. More than likely, I have about a couple of years to live, but I know that this is incurable. And what I love is, or not love, but what is interesting is I love how Bryan Cranston really shows off what kind of that, kind of you can tell how Skylar and Walt's relationship is going, and just the way Bryan Cranston just acts it out because he drives home and he comes home, he goes straight to the fridge and opens a beer and says, and he doesn't tell his wife that he just found out that he has cancer, which is something that I think most men would probably tell their wives. But he's kind of still in shock, and his wife is just nagging on him for um, nagging on him to about the did you use the MasterCard, or yeah, the MasterCard? And he said, yes, I did. I had to use it to buy printer paper. And she's like, well, the MasterCard isn't the one we can use. So I like that scene because she doesn't really acknowledge the fact that I feel like if she had some compassion, I think he would probably have told her, and instead of saying just fine, probably told her, and he would have been more passionate about it. But and so he's like, but it was for printer paper. Um, so then we kind of start to see um him sort of lose it by he's standing out. So he's back um at the car wash, and he's staring at the sky, and we can tell that he's got a million things going on in his mind. And his boss comes by, Mr. Bogdan, and says, Walter, I need you to do some white downs, or maybe it's not white downs. I need you to where he starts, he tells him to do some white downs, and he says, Walter, and of course he's not paying attention to him, and he says, Walter, I need you to do some wipe downs. He tells, and then he says, then this is where he starts to snap just a little bit and says, F you and your eyebrows, and he starts tearing everything up, and he storms off, and I can see that these are they're at the beginning of this episode, there are sort of small moments where we see him going to, slowly becoming the villain. Um, and he quits his job, and then he goes the next morning or that evening. He's sitting out by his pool, and he's just staring at the pool, lighting a match, letting it light, and then flicking the match into the pool. And then he takes another match, flicks it into the pool, and then he decides at that moment to call his brother-in-law Hank, and he asks Hank if he is going to be doing, if he kind of invites himself to do a ride along, and he says, "Is there any chance of doing a ride along?" And Hank says, "Sure," through the phone, and then our next scene is Hank and I want to say his name is Carlos, uh, but Hank and his partner are sitting in a van by themselves, at this house, at someone's house, and they're looking for a guy named Captain Cook, and um, and he says. This guy, and what I like is Hank and Gomez are sitting out, and he says, I guess the guy is named. Um, he's he's in the back seat with Hank and Steve Gomez, um, and they're doing a stakeout in the neighborhood of one of the drug dealers that they're about to bust, talking about sage and basically what type of paint is used for the house, trying to make just simple conversation. And he says, and we see so he takes his walkie-talkie and says, "SWAT team, move in." And a van after a school bus moves by, a van comes up with like 7 or 8 SWAT team members, and they stake out the house. And then we see a guy in basically with headphones on and a beanie, and he's uh, breaking off cutting up the drugs. And as he's cutting up the drugs, we see the SWAT team move in. The SWAT team comes in and takes a uh, one of takes a hammer or one of their batons and breaks the glass. And as they're breaking the glass, Jorge, or one of the guys, just runs. The guy that's cutting up the stuff, the meth is, and they arrest um they break the door open and they arrest one of the drug dealers. And then he gets a call. Then Hank and Walter are in the back of the car, or in the van, and Walt says, "Is there any way I can go in and check out the meth lab?" And Hank says, "Let's okay. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go check it out and see if it's safe, and then let you come in." And they decide to go, and as they're going, Walt looks over at the window of the house that they just busted in, and he sees a man or a kid uh, basically uh, uh, escape through the window. He walks on the rooftop, falls off, and we see uh, him fall off. And then a woman that he's been sleeping with comes out and starts throwing his clothes out the window. Um, then the boy that fell, or the man that fell off, the guy that fell out the window, is we're introduced to Jesse Pinkman. He falls in and hides off the corner of the house. He sees Walter White and notices him and tells Walter, mimes to Walter to be quiet. And Walter's like, "Wait a minute, is that Jesse Pinkman? Pinkman? Is that you?" And then he gets a ride, or he escapes from the house through his car, and he drives off. And Walter notices his license plate says Captain Cook. Um, and he drives off. And then that night, Walter, um, Jesse is hiding his car, and he puts a tarp over his car. And as he's um, as he's putting his tarp over his car, Walt comes up to him, and Jesse's like, ask how did he find him, and and he's like, you're in our record system. You still live with your mother's house, and he um, looks around his car, and he says, Captain Cook. And Jesse's known as Captain Cook, and gives him a speech. And I like that scene because he says, "Let me give you a speech." And Jesse's like, "Look, is this a way for me to come come to? Is this your way of asking me to come to Jesus or right my wrongs? I'm not doing it." And he says, and I like that scene because you see that Walter's more interested in, you know, making the money, and he's doing it for his family because of his cancer. But he's saying, one speech, and he says, uh, you know, you know, the business, and I know the chemistry. Maybe we should be partners, and maybe we should be partners because the DEA took all of his money, and that he could partner up with Jesse to cook crystal meth together. And Walter, if they do that, Walter will not turn him in. And he says, "Your partner's already gone. You have nothing." Walter pretty much says, "Look, I'm the only way. I'm the only way you're going to get out of this." And then, and so we are going to cook together. And then then we go kind of back to see what Skylar's doing, and Skylar and Marie are talking about her selling of her china, and Marie is more interested in is kind of saying, Marie's sort of like, what about the novel you wanted to write? And she said, and she's like, well, it's just the novel that I thought about writing was just a dream that I kind of wanted to do, but you know how dreams are. Dreams don't come true, kind of, or not dreams don't come true, but sort of like I've kind of put it off. And they just have that moment, and then Marie starts kind of prying into how Walt is doing with finding out that he has cancer, um, and it's more short stories. Marie offers to critique it. Scholar says no. Marie changes the subject and focuses on Walt. How Walt's doing because of the cancer, and how he's turning 50. And she's like, well, he's turning 50, and his life is going to be different, and um she and if Walt is having a midlife crisis. So then, and I kind of like that moment where she's like, Walt is having a midlife. So meanwhile, Walt is in his lab at his school, and he's basically stealing chemistry supplies. He leaves the school, and he's got like a Bunsen burner and a basking flisk and a bunch of these chemistry instruments. And so he walks out of the school with a box full of uh, instruments, and uh, he goes to Jesse's house, and he talks about the bottles of glass. He says, "I want to cook in this," and Jesse's pretty much looking at it and saying, um, "Cook." He's saying, "I want to cook in one of these," and he says, "This is a 500 milliliter." Uh, 500 milliliter flask, and he starts arguing. He says, "You don't cook in a 500 milliliter glass. This is a basing nest." And then they start to argue about what to use. They start talking about using a boiling flask and a volumetric flask. He asks Jesse if he's learned nothing from his chemistry class. Jesse says, "Cooking is art, and what I cook is the bomb." And Walter is like, "The stuff you cook is shit. We will not make garbage. We will make a pure substance that'll be the most pure meth ever." And then Jesse starts looking at his safety equipment, and um Walter warns him about the dangers of the chemicals. Jesse says, "You can't leave your he's like, "You can't leave your stuff here." He says, "I basically don't cook where I live." And then um your stuff here, and then they think about an alternative place to work, and he says one of them was Walt suggests a one of those storage units, and Jesse shuts it down by saying, "Dogs usually sniff around there," and then Jesse suggests, "How about your house?" And Walt's like, "No," all in shock that he's like, "No, no," and he's like, "Oh, why not?" And oh, that's right. And then they kind of settle on, um, and he's like, they settle on an RV, and Jesse thinks, "Did Walt go nuts? Because you were nothing like you were in high school." He kind of asks the question, "Are you okay? Are you depressed? Just if this is the stuff I need to know." And they settle on buying an RV, and Walt says, "Just go and buy the RV." Uh, so so they meet at the school. Walt gives all the money he has to Jesse. Jesse says, "This guy wants more," and Walt tells Jesse to negotiate. That's what Jesse's good at. And Jesse asks Walt, why is he doing it? And Jesse thinks he's crazy. And Walt says, "I am finally awake," and tells him just to buy the RV. And so I've kind of see that at this point, he is, then we kind of get the title of the episode. He says, "What? Some stiff like you?" Well, this is what Jesse says. "Some stiff like you turns 50 years old and cracks, and all of a sudden you're Breaking Bad." And Walt says, "I am officially awake." And Jesse says, "A guy like you isn't isn't cut out to be a drug dealer." And Jesse asks him if Walt's gone crazy. Or are you going depressed? That's something Jesse needs to know about. And Jesse and Walt says, I have been awake just by the RV. And then and Walt says we're going to start tomorrow. And then we get to sort of this is sort of his first, maybe second real test of how he's going through a change. So they're at a department store, and uh Walt Jr. is trying on clothes, and he's trying to put on his pair of pants, and because of his disability it's hard for him, so he calls for his dad to help him with his pants and putting on his pants. And so Walt goes in there, helps his son, and it's a really kind moment if you think about it. And then Walter Jr. is basically, uh, checking out his jeans in the mirror just to see how they fit and how they look. And Skylar gives Walt Jr. some encouragement. Says, your pants kind of make you look like a skater. And um, with skater pants, Walt Jr. says, "Do I look like a skater?" And then we hear some snickering from a group of boys. Um, are they're see how they fit. Three boys are in the background and are making fun of Walter Jr. and saying, "Hey, look at my pants. These are my big boy pants." And we see Skylar starts to make a move, and Walt says, "Don't." And he leaves the department store, and he walks back in total rage. Um, he walks over to the bullies and gets right behind them and takes his foot and just steps on one of the bullies' calves and says, "What's the matter, friend? You got trouble? You have trouble walking?" And then the other boys go up to him and says, "Oh, we're going to mess you up." And he says, "Well, if you got the chance, you only got one chance to make it right. So are you gonna come and hit me? I don't think so." So he says, "You have one chance," and he says, "You got to take it. Come on, are you gonna take a shot and try to hit him?" And Walt and one of his uh and he to hit Walt, and Walt tells the leader of the bullies to take a shot and try to hit Walt. And one of the cronies says, "Come on, man, let's just get out of here." Um, and as they're leaving, one of the um, one of the bullies calls Walt a psycho. And I think this is another part of Walt standing up for himself. Walt Then we're back with Walt and Jesse are out in the desert with their RV. Then Jesse looks at where they are and starts talking about cows. And he's asking where the cow house is. And he's like, "Cow house? Yeah, the house for the cows." And Walt is just thinking Jesse is an idiot. And Walt starts to undress and change clothes so he can't go home smelling like a meth lab. And Jesse is like, well, yeah, I go home and smell like a meth lab. I don't see what the problem is. So Walt is in an apron and in his briefs. Jesse starts making fun of his appearance with the camcorder. And he says, and Walt's like, just, you need to turn this off. So we see a montage of them making meth. We see him making chemicals, and they make crystal meth, and Jesse looks at the meth that they make, and it's just like this sheet of glass. And Jesse's like, you're an artist. You are an artist. And Walt's kind of really sincere and doesn't take any credits, and he's like, look, it's just basic chemistry. And then Jesse starts looking at it, and he takes some tweezers and he goes and wants to taste a little bit of it, and Walt kind of slaps his hand and says, no, we are not going to taste any of this. We are not taking any of it. We are only going to use this to sell it. Then before they try it, then Jesse takes a sample of the stuff they cook and goes to Crazy Eight, played by Max Argentino, who we mentioned from Veronica Mars, Barbershop 2, and Snowfall. And he's at his house, and he opens the door, and Crazy Eight has this dummy that's probably full of hay, and he's got it on this pulley system, and he pulls it down and up where a hungry, vicious dog is uh, trying to bite at it, and he says, and then Jesse comes in and says like, "S.A., I'm so sorry about your cousin. It sucks that he went to jail." And and he's like, "Jesse, I heard you dimed on him or left Emilio." And Jesse says, that's not true. And next time you talk to Emilio, to tell that for him. And Jesse gives Crazy Eight the meth that Walt made, and Crazy tries it and says, it's all right. And Jesse's like, what? It's all right. This stuff is the bomb. And he talks about Crazy's cousin Emilio, and if Craze has talked to him, and how lucky Jesse is. And Craze, suspects Jesse of snitching on Emilio, as Jesse calls BS on it. And Jesse starts to threaten to kick Emilio's ass, and then Emilio, played by Comier, John Koyama, he's done a lot of stunt coordination for a lot of films. Recently, he was on The Boys. He did second unit uh, for The Boys. He did Preacher. He did stunts for Twisters, Boba Fett, Justice League, Batman v Superman, The Fast and Furious 7, Agent of Steel, Pirates of the Caribbean, Gamer. I think he does mostly stunts. Um, I think this is his only actually acting role, but he plays Emilio, and he walks down the stairs and says, "I just got out this morning." and then they both sort of corner Jesse and ask him where they make the meth. Where'd you get this batch? And then Jesse, or not Jesse, Walter is in the um is outside the Winnebago in the desert when he hears a car coming up the street. So the car is coming up the street, and it's got they're blasting music, and you can hear the bass, and Crazy Eight and Emilio go with Jesse to the desert where the RV and Walt is cooking, and Emilio kind of comes out of the car and says offers Walt to work for him. Walt says Walt just says, I'm willing to sell it to him for a price, and Crazy Eight or Emilio shows, or Crazy Eight shows Walt a bag of cash, but Crazy Eight notices Walt as the guy from the drug bust. So I like that scene, or I guess the way to see it is like, you know, I'll do it for a price, and um, Walt or Crazy Eight or Emilio is like going, well, yeah, we could probably work out a deal. And then Crazy Eight gets out of the car and says, I know that guy. That guy was at the drug bust that I was at. And he says, this guy's a snitch. And he's a snitch, and he's working with the DEA. And then they pull out their guns, and Jesse tells Walt to run, and Jesse trips. Then Emilio thinks they should kill them both, and so it's kind of this really cool standoff where you see um, they've got both both the drug dealers have their guns on both Walt and Jesse, and Walt says, you know what, I'll cook the meth. I'll cook up a batch for you guys. So Waltz is in the Winnebago, and we see him making the meth and using all the science, the chemistry to it. And Waltz, or we see Emilio smoking a cigarette in front of Walt, and then Waltz points to, or Crazy Eight is smoking a cigarette in front of Walt, and he tells Emilio that you probably shouldn't smoke in. Tell your cousin that he shouldn't smoke in here because the flames are toxic. And he says, and he kind of points to him, and Emilio flicks his cigarette into the dead grass, and that starts a fire. Um, um, are gathered, and while just cooking, okay, so he starts it starts a fire, and as he's making the batch, he's kind of crunching up the stuff, and then Walt, in a way of getting out of his situation, um, he Walt, let's see, and Walt takes the powder and pours it into into a bowl, and it makes an explosion. Boom! And then Walt escapes from the Winnebago, locks the door. Emilio and Crazy Eight suffocate. Walt tries to stop the fire from going ablaze. He tries stomping on the flames, but it's too much for him. He then takes takes his friend and tries to get the fire to takes his shirt and tries to get the fire to calm down. And then Walter and Jesse, with gas mask on, drive down the mountain from the fire. This is where the beginning of the episode starts. So they're driving down. So he gets in the car. They put the gas mask on. Crazy Eight and um, Emilio are knocked out, and their bodies are moving around the Winnebago, and then we pretty much get to where Walter is, where the beginning of the episode starts, where Walter's got his gun out, and the shot of the camera looks at the circle of the gun and pulls out, and we see him with his gun out, and he hears sirens, and then Walt pretty much just starts to break down. Um, then he starts to break down and sob and thinks the end, and considers actually shooting himself. Um, but the safety is off, or safety is on. Or safety is off, and then he turns it, and safety is off on, and then he turns it, safety is off, and he shoots the bullet, and he gets scared, and he hears sirens, and he thinks, and as he hears the sirens, he thinks the police are coming, and it happens to be the fire department driving past him, and Jesse emerges from the camper and talks about proton gas and throwing up. And then we see basically and Walter's back at his home, and he's got a bunch of money that he has, I guess, from the bust of Emilio, is in a dryer hamper, and it's being dried, and as it's um, he pulls it in his bag and goes to bed, where Skylar is waiting up for him, and she asks him where has he been, and he's not to shut her out. End of episode. Well, she doesn't like it when she shuts him out, and then the episode ends. And that's the pilot for Breaking Bad. I like this episode. I think with a lot of pilot episodes, there's a lot to discuss in it. I think the episode really, we really see kind of the 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 beginnings of Walter's character, and also the relationship between Walter White and Jesse, kind of how their friendship will begin as well. Also, we'll see slowly how Walter's attitude will change through the rest of the thing. But I liked how this episode really lets the character build off stuff. And we kind of know more in depth of what this character deals with. But that is um, the pilot episode. I give it an 8.10 out of 10. I like this episode. I really kind of, if I would have I probably would have liked to seen this episode and the second episode back to back to really be involved. But seeing the pilot episode, I really liked it. I feel like it was a great introduction to Walter White, and I liked how it showed the character coming in. So that was, but I guess what I'm saying is, I'll look at this, and then on our next video, I'll be talking about Tony Soprano. I can kind of tell, and then what I'll do is do maybe like a third where I'll be looking at Tony and Walter and well, I feel like Walter is kind of getting up the courage to become the bad guy in this pilot episode. Um, so I liked it. Those are my thoughts on Breaking Bad. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. And as always, see you at the movies. And next week is Sopranos. So more of the anti-hero. Peace. Bye.